Growing up, I found conspiracies fascinating, although I had little interest in conspiracy theories and much less in conspiracy facts. Ever since I was a child, I liked mysteries such as those described in the detective stories of Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot. As a teenager in the 90s, shows like The X Files certainly contributed to my interest in conspiracies. One should, however, note that those examples all refer to fictional sources. My young self loathed politics, and ultimately conspiracy theories are a subcategory of politics, so I did not know or care about them. Yet I did understand that conspiring was something that people tended to do in certain avenues of society. After all, to conspire, etymologically meaning to breathe together, simply means the following, according to this definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary: to join in a secret agreement, to do an unlawful or wrongful, and I would add harmful, act, or an act which becomes unlawful as a result of the secret agreement. And the second definition states, to act in harmony toward a common end. The term conspiracy theory is described as follows: a theory that explains an event or set of circumstances as the result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators, or a theory asserting that a secret of great importance is being kept from the public. Please note that neither of those definitions make any effort to associate conspiracies with outrageous or false claims, or the ramblings of madmen, and honestly I was surprised by the neutral stance of Merriam-Webster on the matter. You see, in my later teens, I was still intrigued by conspiracies. For example, when the movie Titanic came out, most people were complaining how odd it was that the tragedy was turned into a love story. I agreed, yet the movie would have been much more interesting if it had conspiracies, aliens, and time travel. I don't think that's what the others meant when they were criticizing the movie, though. I began to notice a reticence among people when it came to discussing conspiracies. I didn't quite understand why that was the case, but I got the message. Occasionally, people acted like conspiracies didn't exist, or the very least pretended like they didn't, which contributed to my confusion. When I was a boy, I used to read Lucky Luke comics set in the Wild West, although made in France. The four Dalton brothers conspired together to rob a bank or commit other crimes. I saw nothing outlandish about the simple notion that people conspire, and it made little sense to me why most people had such an aversion to such topics. My first introduction to so-called classic conspiracy theories came in high school as a friend introduced me to the card game Illuminati and explained the basics of the concept behind the conspiracy theories regarding the Illuminati. In a nutshell, it was supposedly a secret group that had been controlling humanity from the shadows for centuries, if not millennia. Many political groups, although on the surface were antagonists, but in actuality were controlled by the same entity. I thought it made sense, yet when I asked a friend who knew more about politics than me whether it was true, he shook his head and said, "No, it can't be proven." I shrugged it off, although I wasn't convinced by this explanation that it necessarily meant this Illuminati didn't exist. Yet ultimately it was an issue of politics that I cared little about. Whereas that friend was more knowledgeable in such matters, so I filed it away as fiction. Only later, when 9/11 happened and I became interested in politics, I gradually began to look into conspiracy theories. However, this isn't about me but conspiracies. Let's have a few examples of conspiracies in practice that nobody can deny to be factual once they think about it. Certainly, colonels and generals conspire against the enemy during wartime, employing tactics and strategies to gain an upper hand in causing harm to the opposition. These plots are usually done in secret, i.e., by conspiring, since the enemy knowing about them would generally weaken their effectiveness. Businessmen and women conspire together to manipulate the consumer to buy and use their product and services. Someone might argue that it's not a conspiracy, but I might remind you of the second definition of conspire, to act in harmony toward a common end. That is what employees of any corporation are expected to do. Yet, I don't mean to imply that the conspiring done by corporations is limited only to innocuous business practices. The third example would be that of politicians conspiring to further their own interest or interest of political organizations they are associated with. This claim might be more controversial according to the general public, since for some peculiar reason they tend to assume that their politicians don't conspire. It's only those nasty people in countries like Russia or North Korea. But in fact, even politicians in Western Europe or the US are capable of such feats. Let's see the US presidential elections in the last decade. Democrats claim that the Republicans colluded with Russia, whereas Republicans attest that the allegations of Russian collusion are a conspiracy theory against Trump and his administration. The relevant detail here is that both sides seem to believe in conspiracies when it suits them. If people are capable of conspiring, and indeed do so, it logically follows that conspiracies exist. The difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory is that the first is factual and the second is hypothetical. Although, as we've seen in recent years, often yesterday's conspiracy theory becomes today's conspiracy fact. Even more than the notion of conspiracy, the term conspiracy theory is reviled, and for a large part we have the CIA to thank for that, allegedly. It is claimed that after the JFK assassination, another conspiracy, the CIA popularized the use of the term conspiracy theory in the pejorative context. Whether or not the CIA was responsible, it is clear it has become a tool used by the establishment to shut down inconvenient facts. Disregarding any historical context of the phrase and the social baggage it holds, let's simply look at the words conspiracy and theory put together. Or, put in other words, it's a suspicion of a conspiracy. The word theory usually implies that there is some sort of basis or evidence, circumstantial or not, behind the suspicion. So, absolute conspiracy fiction, such as claiming the alien race of squibiddles controls the staff at the supermarket across the street by sonic frequencies, is not a conspiracy theory, since it's something I just made up. Conspiracy theory, then, is something with a degree, whether big or small degree, of credibility behind it, such as the police when they're investigating a murder scene and find evidence the killer did not act alone, i.e., it would become a conspiracy. Therefore, the investigators would formulate a conspiracy theory based on the evidence available and investigate further, trying to prove or refute the theory. Or, if there's a political assassination, it's reasonable to speculate that the culprit might be a political entity with means, motive, and opportunity, in addition to past examples of similar behavior from said entity, even if we lack the smoking gun. Even more outlandish claims, such as aliens using mind control lasers to control humanity from their base on the dark side of the moon, might also have a degree of credibility, although usually only a small degree. Yet they might still deserve the right to be called a theory. The problem with something like that, or say claiming Antarctica does not exist, is that they are practically unfalsifiable. The average person does not have the means to go to the moon or to Antarctica to have a look. Even most people with extraordinary resources are incapable of doing so. Down to earth political conspiracy theories such as assassinations and various kinds of clandestine collusion should be separated from the more fantastical ones, such as ones including aliens and such. Although far be it from me to dissuade people from looking into out there matters should they find interest in them. It's only to remind that you will never prove that shape-shifting reptilians control the world if we assume that such beings exist by reading books or watching videos online. At least you will never find incontrovertible proof in such matters unless you happen to step into a dimensional rift and end up in a reptilian base. Mundane conspiracies, such as assassinations that are beholden to laws of physics and cause and effect, can be proven to a certain degree, or at least a lot of relevant information can be interpolated from the facts available. JFK was not shot with an actual magic bullet, and the fact that the Warren Commission was promoting the notion did suggest certain things. The 9/11 Commission report didn't even mention Building 7, which fell right into its footprint despite no plane hitting it, and Lucky Larry saying on camera that he gave the order to pull it.
Is pull it. And they made that decision to pull.
The supposed fact that the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk, Tyler Robinson, was able to get away with his murder at the campus in Utah without being caught by the authorities or the numerous surveillance cameras in the official narrative says something about the official narrative. The fact is that conspiracies are a fact. There is nothing outlandish or crazy about acknowledging it. One reason why people are averse to it though might simply be a failure in understanding the meaning of the word. Being a card-carrying member of the language Nazi party, these invoke ire in me like nothing else. Once upon a time I read a YouTube comment saying, "Oh my god, 9/11 wasn't a conspiracy." That must be one of the dumbest lines of text ever written. 9/11 indeed was a conspiracy. Whether you believe it was perpetrated by Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, the US government as an inside job, or another foreign agency like Mossad, it is a conspiracy. Unless the argument is that 9/11 was an accident. Those planes and hijackers just coincidentally flew into the buildings at the same time and so on. Another thing I see on the internet occasionally is, "This isn't a conspiracy, this is real." It falsely implies that conspiracies are not real. Nothing in the definition of the word conspiracy suggests it is inherently fantastical or unreal. Some of the reasons for aversion to conspiracies, beyond misunderstanding, is that the implications of conspiracies make a lot of people feel uncomfortable as they can imply their governments and multinational corporations might not have their best interest at heart. Certainly, conspiring governments and corporations have contributed to this by demonizing conspiracy theorists. On a deeper level, though, I would say the notion of conspiracies goes against the mechanistic philosophy of random forces with no inherent purpose making the world go around. Whereas conspiracy theories tend to suggest, at least in the sphere of society, various kinds of intentional actions dictating the way things are. Ultimately, one might say that the conventional way coincidence theorists believes in unintentional natural forces, while the conspiracy theorist believes in will or conscious intention. One could even extrapolate that to apply to the metaphysical realm. Random chance versus the will of God or the meddling of the devil. The fact that conspiracies exist or that many conspiracy theories are actually reasonable approximations of what might have happened does not mean that all conspiracy theories are true. Certainly, there are many false ones out there, either to discredit the legitimate ones or because of simple excess use of imagination in coining explanations for the world's events. This goes without saying, but this being the internet, I may have to say it anyway, even though 9/11 was an actual conspiracy does not mean that every crackpot claim about aliens and shots is real. Some people try to lump everything together. You believe A is real, therefore you must also believe B. It behooves the critical thinking people of the internet to look into conspiracy theories or perhaps devise our own ones to try to arrive at facts to explain how and why this world is run. Just as a reminder, arguably the most famous European in all of history, Julius Caesar, died as a result of a conspiracy.